The silver moon cast an eerie glow over Spokane, Washington territory, as Willa Crawford stood at her bedroom window, her fingers trembling as she clutched the letter her father had just delivered. Her life had been reduced to a business transaction, her future signed away to Bartholomew Jenkins, a man whose reputation for violence was whispered about throughout the territory. A single tear trailed down her cheek as she realized she had only 1 week of freedom left before becoming the wife of the most feared man in the county. It was 1878, and Spokane was still finding its place in the expanding American frontier. Thomas Crawford, once a prosperous rancher, had fallen deeply into debt after a devastating drought killed half his cattle. Willa had known things were bad, but she never imagined her father would resort to promising her hand in marriage to settle his debts. Willa sat on the edge of her bed, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. At 20 years old, she had always dreamed of marrying for love, not being traded like cattle to a man nearly twice her age. Jenkins owned half the businesses in town and had a reputation for getting what he wanted by any means necessary. "Willa," her father's voice called from the hallway. "May I come in?" She quickly wiped away her tears. "Yes, father." Thomas Crawford entered the room, his once proud shoulders now stooped with the burden of his decisions. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened in recent months, and his hands, once steady and strong, now trembled slightly. "I know you must hate me right now," he said quietly. Willa shook her head. "I don't hate you, father. I just don't understand why it has to be him. Everyone knows what kind of man Bartholomew Jenkins is." Thomas sank onto the bed beside her. "I didn't have a choice, Willa. The bank was about to foreclose. Jenkins was the only one willing to settle my debts, but he had one condition." He looked at his daughter with pain-filled eyes. There must be another way," Willa pleaded. Thomas took her hands in his. "I've tried everything. I even rode to Missoula looking for a loan. No one would help." He paused. "Jenkins has promised you'll want for nothing. He's building that big house on the hill, and you'll have servants, fine clothes, and a husband who beats his workers and threatened to kill Sheriff Wilson last month," Willa interrupted. Thomas flinched. "Those are just rumors." "You don't believe that any more than I do," Willa said softly. Her father stood, his expression hardening. "The wedding is next Saturday. Jenkins will be coming for dinner tomorrow night to discuss the arrangements. Please, try to be civil." After her father left, Willa stared out the window at the sprawling landscape. The Crawford Ranch had been her home her entire life. She loved the rolling hills, the smell of sage after a rainstorm, the way the sunset painted the mountains purple and gold. Now it would all belong to Bartholomew Jenkins, along with her. The next morning, Willa rode her favorite mare, Penny, to the edge of their property. She needed time alone, away from the sympathetic glances of the ranch hands who had surely heard the news by now. The early summer air was crisp against her face as she urged Penny faster, feeling momentarily free. She stopped at the top of a ridge overlooking a small stream that marked the boundary of Crawford land. In the distance, she could see a lone rider approaching along the main road. Something about his easy posture in the saddle captured her attention. He wasn't from around here. She knew most everyone in the area. Curiosity piqued. Willa guided Penny down the ridge toward the road. As she got closer, she could see the stranger more clearly. He sat tall on a magnificent black stallion, his broad shoulders outlined against the morning sky. A well-worn cowboy hat shaded his face, and his duster coat billowed slightly in the breeze. When he noticed her approach, the stranger slowed his horse. Willa hesitated, suddenly aware that proper ladies didn't accost travelers on the open road, but propriety seemed less important now that her life had been reduced to a business arrangement. "Good morning," the man called, tipping his hat. His voice was deep but gentle, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Good morning," Willa replied, studying him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps mid-20s, with intelligent blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his skin was tanned from life outdoors. "I'm looking for the Crawford Ranch," he said. "Am I headed in the right direction?" Willa's heart skipped. Was this man somehow connected to Jenkins? "You found it. I'm Willa Crawford. My father owns the ranch. For now, at least." The stranger's eyebrows rose at her bitter tone, but he didn't comment on it. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Crawford. I'm Yates Lawson. I heard Mr. Crawford might be hiring ranch hands." Relief washed over Willa, not connected to Jenkins after all. "We're always looking for good workers, especially with Roundup coming. The ranch is just down this road about a mile." Yates nodded, his eyes lingering on her face. "Are you all right, Miss Crawford? You seem troubled, if you don't mind my saying so." Willa was startled by his perception. She'd been trying so hard to maintain her composure. "Just family matters, Mr. Lawson. Nothing that should concern a potential ranch hand." "Fair enough," he said with a small smile. "Would you mind if I ride with you back to the ranch? I'd appreciate an introduction to your father." Willa hesitated only briefly before nodding. There was something about Yates Lawson that put her at ease, a quiet steadiness that contrasted sharply with the volatile temperament of the man she was being forced to marry. As they rode side by side, Willa found herself studying him. His clothes were worn but clean, and the way he handled his horse spoke of years of experience. His gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster well used but meticulously maintained. "Where are you from, Mr. Lawson?" she asked. "All over lately." "Born in Texas, worked ranches in Colorado, Montana Territory, and most recently Idaho." He glanced at her. "I prefer to keep moving, but I've heard good things about this part of Washington Territory." "It's beautiful country," Willa agreed, "though I haven't seen much beyond Spokane myself." "Never traveled. Father always said a woman's place is at home." Willa immediately regretted the bitterness in her voice. Yates seemed to consider this. "My mother would disagree. She rode the trails with my father for 20 years before they settled down. Said the best education comes from seeing the world with your own eyes." Willa felt a pang of envy. "They sound like remarkable people." "They were," he said quietly. "Lost them both to influenza 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Willa said, genuinely touched by the flash of grief that crossed his face. "My mother passed when I was 12. They rode in companionable silence until the main house came into view. The Crawford Ranch wasn't the largest in the territory, but it was respectable, a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Several ranch hands were visible, mending fences and tending to livestock. Thomas Crawford was in the barn when they arrived. He looked up in surprise as Willa entered with a stranger. "Father, this is Mr. Yates Lawson. He's looking for work." Thomas wiped his hands on a rag and extended one to Yates. "Thomas Crawford, you picked an interesting time to show up, Mr. Lawson. We're a bit short-handed with Roundup coming." "That's what I heard in town," Yates said, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. "I've worked cattle most of my life, sir. I'm handy with horses too, and I can repair just about anything that breaks." Thomas studied the younger man. "Where'd you work last?" "Bennett Ranch in Idaho. Mr. Bennett can provide a reference if you need it." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "We pay $30 a month plus room and board. Work starts at dawn and ends when the job's done. Sundays are yours unless there's an emergency." "That's fair," Yates agreed. "Can you start today?" "Yes, sir." Thomas turned to his foreman, who had wandered over during the conversation. Frank, show Mr. Lawson to the bunkhouse and get him settled, then put him to work on the north pasture fence. We need it fixed before we move the herd." As the men walked away, Willa caught Yates glancing back at her with a small smile. Something warm fluttered in her chest, a feeling she quickly suppressed. Getting attached to a ranch hand wouldn't do her any good, especially with her wedding only days away. That evening, Willa stood in front of her wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear for dinner with Bartholomew Jenkins. She settled on a modest blue dress that her mother had always said brought out the color in her eyes. Her honey blonde hair was swept up in a simple but elegant style, a few tendrils framing her face. "You look beautiful," her father said when she descended the stairs. There was a sadness in his eyes that made her heart ache. "Thank you, father," she replied stiffly. The sound of approaching hooves announced Jenkins's arrival. Willa's stomach twisted into knots as she watched through the window. Bartholomew Jenkins was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered with a thick black beard that did little to hide the cruelty in his expression. He dismounted with surprising grace for a man of his size, and strode toward the house with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Remember your manners," Thomas whispered to Willa as he opened the door. Jenkins filled the doorway, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the simple furnishings of the Crawford home. His eyes found Willa immediately, traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "You're even lovelier than I remembered." Willa forced herself to curtsy. "Mr. Jenkins, thank you for joining us." Jenkins handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper, a gift for my future bride. Under her father's watchful eye, Willa unwrapped it to find a gold locket on a delicate chain. It was beautiful and undoubtedly expensive. "It's lovely," she said, trying to sound grateful. "Allow me," Jenkins said, taking the necklace from her hands. His fingers brushed her neck as he fastened the clasp, lingering longer than necessary. Willa fought the urge to pull away. During dinner, Jenkins dominated the conversation, detailing his plans for expanding his businesses and describing the house he was building. "It will have 6 bedrooms, he told Willa with a meaningful look. "I plan to fill them all eventually." Willa nearly choked on her food. "The wedding preparations are coming along nicely," Jenkins continued. "I've arranged for Pastor Miller to perform the ceremony at noon on Saturday, followed by a reception at the hotel. I expect the entire town will attend." "That sounds..." "Elaborate," Willa managed. "Only the best for my bride," Jenkins replied. "I've also taken the liberty of ordering your wedding dress from San Francisco. It should arrive on Thursday's stage." Thomas cleared his throat. "That's very generous, Bartholomew, but Willa was planning to wear her mother's dress." Jenkins's expression hardened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Of course, if that's what she prefers, though I think she'll find my selection more suitable for the occasion." After dinner, Thomas excused himself to his study, leaving Willa alone with Jenkins in the parlor. She sat rigidly on the sofa, trying to maintain a respectable distance, but Jenkins soon moved closer. "I've waited a long time for this, Willa," he said, his voice dropping. "I've had my eye on you since you turned 17. Willa suppressed a shudder. "I wasn't aware." "Your father refused me then," Jenkins continued, his eyes darkening. "Said you were too young, but things have a way of working out for those who are patient." He reached out to touch her cheek. Willa couldn't help but flinch away. Jenkins's expression shifted instantly, anger flashing in his eyes before he controlled it. "You'll learn to appreciate my touch, Willa. I can be very persuasive." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Willa opened her mouth to respond when a knock at the door interrupted them. She almost sagged with relief. Thomas answered it to find Yates Lawson standing on the porch. "Sorry to disturb you, sir," Yates said, "but we've got a problem with one of the pregnant mares. Frank thought you'd want to know right away." Thomas nodded. "Of course. Please excuse me, Bartholomew. Willa can entertain you until I return." As Thomas left with Yates, Jenkins's eyes narrowed. "New hand. Mr. Lawson just started today," Willa explained, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Hum." Jenkins stood and walked to the window, watching as Thomas and Yates headed toward the barn. "He won't be staying long." "Pardon me," Jenkins turned back to her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "After the wedding, I'll be bringing in my own men to run the ranch. No need for your father's employees." "This ranch has been in my family for generations," Willa protested. "Those men have worked here for years." Jenkins approached her slowly, like a predator stalking prey. "The ranch will be mine, Willa, just like you." He reached for her again, this time gripping her arm. "The sooner you accept that, the happier our marriage will be." His fingers dug painfully into her flesh. Willa tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Please, you're hurting me." "You need to learn who's in charge," Jenkins growled, pulling her closer. "I won't tolerate disobedience from my wife." The front door opened suddenly, and Yates stepped in. He paused, taking in the scene before him. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "Mr. Crawford asked me to inform Mr. Jenkins that he'll be a while with the mare. She's having complications." Jenkins released Willa's arm but didn't move away. "Tell him I understand. I should be getting back to town anyway." He turned to Willa, his voice softening artificially. "I look forward to our next meeting, my dear." After Jenkins left, Willa rubbed her arm where his fingers had left red marks. She was startled to find Yates still standing in the doorway, watching her with concern. "Are you all right, Miss Crawford?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you," she replied automatically, then hesitated. "Actually, no, I'm not all right at all." Yates stepped further into the room but maintained a respectful distance. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Willa gave a bitter laugh. "Unless you can conjure up a fortune to pay off my father's debts, I'm afraid not." Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes. "That man. He's the one you're troubled about. You're to marry him." "Saturday next," Willa confirmed, sinking onto the sofa. She didn't know why she was confiding in a ranch hand she'd just met, but something about Yates Lawson inspired trust. "My father owes him a great deal of money. I'm part of the repayment plan." Yates's jaw tightened. "That's not right. Many things in this world aren't right, Mr. Lawson, yet they happen all the same." Willa straightened her shoulders. "I should check on father. Is the mare truly in distress?" A small smile touched Yates's lips. "She's fine. I noticed you needed rescuing." Willa stared at him in surprise, then felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't interrupted when you did." "I have a fair idea," Yates said grimly. "Men like Jenkins don't change their ways, Miss Crawford. Marriage will only make him worse, not better." "I know," Willa whispered, tears threatening. "But what choice do I have?" Before Yates could answer, they heard Thomas returning. He gave Willa a questioning look. "Where's Bartholomew?" "He had to return to town," Willa explained. "How's the mare?" Thomas looked confused. "What mare?" Yates stepped in smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding, sir. One of the hands thought he saw Daisy in distress, but she's fine." Thomas nodded distractedly. "Good, good." "Willa, did you and Bartholomew have a pleasant chat?" "Very illuminating," Willa replied, avoiding Yates's gaze. That night, Willa couldn't sleep. Jenkins's threat echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his painful grip on her arm. She slipped out of bed and went to her window, gazing out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. Movement near the corral caught her eye. Someone was with the horses. Curious, Willa threw a shawl over her nightgown and quietly made her way downstairs and outside. As she approached the corral, she recognized Yates Lawson's tall figure. He was gently stroking the nose of a spirited Mustang that the ranch hands had captured last week, but hadn't yet been able to tame. "You should be careful with that one," Willa called softly. "He's thrown 3 men already." Yates turned, seemingly unsurprised by her presence. "He's just scared and confused. Aren't you, boy?" he said to the horse, who nudged his hand affectionately. Willa approached cautiously. "How did you get him to trust you so quickly?" "Patience and respect," Yates answered, offering her his hand. "Would you like to try?" Willa hesitated, then stepped closer, allowing Yates to guide her hand to the Mustang's neck. The horse tensed momentarily, then relaxed under her touch. The simple joy of connecting with the animal made her smile for the first time in days. "He likes you," Yates observed, his hand still gently covering hers. Willa was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand over hers, of his scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. She stepped back abruptly, remembering her situation. "You shouldn't be out here alone with me, Mr. Lawson. It wouldn't be proper." "No, I suppose not," he agreed, though he didn't look particularly concerned. "Especially with you being engaged and all." There was something in his tone that made Willa look at him more closely. "You don't approve?" "It's not my place to approve or disapprove," Yates said carefully, "but I believe marriage should be a choice, not a sentence." "A lovely sentiment, but not everyone has the luxury of choice," Willa replied. "My father will lose everything if I don't go through with this wedding." Yates was quiet for a moment. "What if there was another way?" "What do you mean?" "Just thinking aloud," he said vaguely. "You should get back inside before you're missed." Willa knew he was right, but she was reluctant to leave. Something about Yates Lawson made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you again for earlier," she said. "With Mr. Jenkins." "Anyone would have done the same," Yates replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. "Good night, Mr. Lawson." "Good night, Miss Crawford. Sleep well." As Willa made her way back to the house, she couldn't help but wonder what Yates had meant by another way. It was foolish to hope her fate was sealed. Yet something about his confident demeanor made her wonder if he knew something she didn't. The next few days passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Jenkins visited daily, always bringing expensive gifts and always finding ways to touch Willa that made her skin crawl. She endured his attentions with growing dread, counting down the days until her freedom would end. On Wednesday, Willa was helping in the kitchen garden when she noticed Yates working on the fence nearby. He had removed his shirt in the summer heat, and Willa found herself watching the play of muscles across his back as he hammered posts into the ground. When he caught her looking, she blushed and quickly returned to her gardening. Later that afternoon, Willa took refuge in the stables, brushing Penny and trying to find a moment's peace. She was startled when Yates appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said. "I was just checking on that Mustang." "No need to apologize," Willa replied, continuing to brush her mare. "How is he doing?" "Better. I think he's almost ready for a saddle." Yates leaned against the stall door. "Miss Crawford, I've been meaning to ask you something." Willa's heart quickened inexplicably. "Yes. Do you truly intend to go through with this marriage?" The directness of his question took her aback. "I don't see that I have a choice." "There's always a choice," Yates said quietly, "even if none of the options seem good." Willa put down the brush and faced him. "What would you have me do? Run away? And go where? Do what? I have no money, no skills beyond running a household." "You underestimate yourself," Yates said, stepping closer. "You're intelligent, resourceful, and stronger than you know." His confidence in her abilities was both flattering and perplexing. "You barely know me, Mr. Lawson." "I'm a good judge of character," he replied with a small smile. "And I've seen enough to know you deserve better than Bartholomew Jenkins." Willa sighed. Perhaps. But deserving and getting are two different things. Yates seemed about to say more when they heard Thomas calling Willa's name. You should go, Yates said instead. But think about what I said. There are always options. As Willa hurried back to the house, she wondered what options Yates thought she had. The wedding was only 3 days away, and Jenkins had made it clear there would be severe consequences if she tried to back out. That evening, Jenkins arrived for dinner with the wedding dress he'd ordered. It was an elaborate creation of silk and lace, far more ostentatious than anything Willa would have chosen for herself. Try it on, Jenkins insisted. I want to see my bride in her finery. Under her father's encouraging gaze, Willa took the dress upstairs. It was indeed beautiful, though the neckline was lower than she was comfortable with. When she returned to the parlor, Jenkins's eyes roamed over her in a way that made her feel exposed. Perfect, he declared. You'll be the most beautiful bride Spokane has ever seen. He turned to Thomas. You've upheld your end of our bargain admirably, Crawford. I'll have the deed to your property drawn up along with the marriage certificate. Thomas paled slightly. The deed? I thought we agreed you'd forgive the debt in exchange for Willa's hand. Jenkins's smile didn't reach his eyes. That was part of it, certainly. But surely you remember the full terms. The ranch is to become mine upon the marriage, though you're welcome to continue living here, of course. Willa looked between the two men in shock. Father, you're giving him our home too? Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. It was the only way, Willa. The debt was too great. You didn't tell her. Jenkins seemed amused. Tusk, Thomas. No secrets between family members. He turned to Willa. Don't worry, my dear. I'll allow your father to continue managing the ranch under my direction, of course. Willa felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. Not only was she being sacrificed to this terrible man, but their entire legacy was being handed over as well. Excuse me, she managed to say before fleeing upstairs. She heard her father and Jenkins talking for a while longer before Jenkins finally left. Shortly after, Thomas knocked on her door. Willa, may I come in? She didn't answer, but he entered anyway. His face was drawn with guilt and shame. You lied to me, Willa said flatly. I didn't lie, Thomas protested. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Father, and you know it. Willa stood by the window, still wearing the wedding dress. How could you sell our home, Mother's home? Thomas sank onto the bed, suddenly looking every one of his 55 years. I had no choice, Willa. The debt was too great. Jenkins was going to take everything anyway. At least this way we still have a place to live. At his mercy, Willa pointed out bitterly. Yes, Thomas admitted. At his mercy. He looked up at his daughter, tears in his eyes. I've failed you, Willa, failed your mother too. She would be so ashamed of me. Despite her anger, Willa's heart ached for her father. He had always tried his best, even if his decisions weren't always wise. She sat beside him and took his hand. We'll find a way through this, Father, somehow. After Thomas left, Willa changed out of the wedding dress and sat by her window for a long time, watching the stars. When most of the lights around the ranch had gone out, she made a decision. Quickly changing into her riding clothes, she slipped out of the house and headed for the stables. To her surprise, Yates was there, as if he'd been waiting for her. He was saddling the now docile Mustang. Going somewhere, Miss Crawford? He asked, though he didn't seem surprised to see her. How did you know I'd come? Willa asked. Yates smiled slightly. Like I said, I'm a good judge of character. You're not the type to go quietly to a fate you don't deserve. Willa approached him cautiously. I can't marry him, Mr. Lawson, I just can't. But I don't know where to go or what to do. I might be able to help with that, Yates said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. But you need to trust me completely. Can you do that? Willa studied his face in the dim light of the stable. She barely knew this man, yet something told her she could trust him with her life. "Yes," she said simply. Yates nodded, seeming pleased but not surprised by her answer. "Good. I need you to wait here for a moment." He disappeared outside, returning shortly with a small leather satchel. "There's something you should see." From the satchel, he withdrew a folded paper and handed it to Willa. In the faint light, she could just make out that it was a wanted poster with a crude drawing of a man who looked remarkably like Bartholomew Jenkins, though the name listed was different: William Jenks. "Wanted for fraud, extortion, and murder in Colorado territory," Willa read aloud, her voice trembling. $500 reward." She looked up at Yates. "Is this truly Jenkins?" "One and the same," Yates confirmed. "He changes his name wherever he goes, but his methods stay the same. He finds wealthy landowners in financial trouble, offers them loans at impossible interest rates, then forces them to sign over their property, usually throwing in a daughter or sister as part of the deal." "How do you know all this?" Willa asked, suspicious now. Yates hesitated, then reached into his satchel again. This time he withdrew a badge. "United States Marshal," he said quietly. "I've been tracking Jenkins or Jenks or whatever he's calling himself these days for almost 2 years. Willa stared at him in shock. "You're a lawman. Why didn't you arrest him the moment you saw him?" "It's not that simple," Yates explained. "I need proof that he's the same man from Colorado, something more than my word against his. He's careful about leaving evidence." "That's why you came here," Willa realized. "You weren't really looking for work as a ranch hand. I heard rumors in town that Jenkins was forcing a marriage with the daughter of a rancher in financial trouble. It fit his pattern perfectly." Yates looked at her apologetically. "I didn't know it would be you until we met on the road." "After that? Well, my interest became more than professional." Willa wasn't sure how to respond to that admission. "What happens now?" "Now," Yates said, "we set a trap, but I need your help to do it." As Yates outlined his plan, Willa felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It was dangerous, but it was also her only chance to escape the marriage and save her father's ranch. "If this works," she said when he finished explaining, "Jenkins will go to prison." "Yes," Yates confirmed, "for a very long time." "And if it doesn't work?" Yates's expression grew serious. "Then we'll have to run fast and far. I won't let him hurt you, Willa, I promise you that." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. "You're risking a lot to help me." "It's my job," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "Not all of it," Willa replied softly. "You could have arrested Jenkins without involving me at all." Yates stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "Some things are worth the risk," he said, his voice low. For a moment, Willa thought he might kiss her. Part of her hoped he would. Instead, he stepped back. "You should get back to the house before someone notices you're gone. Tomorrow, act as if nothing has changed." "Can you do that?" Willa nodded, though the thought of facing Jenkins and pretending ignorance made her stomach churn. "I'll contact you when everything's in place," Yates promised. "Trust me, Willa, this will work." As she crept back to her room, Willa's mind was racing. In just a few days, she had gone from resigned despair to daring hope. If Yates's plan worked, she would be free of Jenkins forever. If it failed, well, she didn't want to think about that possibility. The next day was the hardest of Willa's life. Jenkins arrived mid-morning with the pastor to discuss the wedding ceremony. Willa had to smile and nod as they planned what she now knew would never happen. Every time Jenkins touched her, placing his hand on her lower back, brushing her hair from her face, she had to fight the urge to pull away. "You seem distracted today, my dear," Jenkins observed over lunch. "Wedding nerves, perhaps?" "Yes, I suppose so," Willa agreed, forcing a smile. "It's all happening so quickly." Jenkins's eyes narrowed slightly. "Having second thoughts?" "Of course not," Willa lied, her heart pounding, just overwhelmed by it all. Jenkins seemed satisfied with her answer, though Thomas gave her a concerned look. After lunch, Jenkins announced he needed to return to town to finalize some business matters. "I'll return tomorrow to escort you to the dress fitting," he told Willa. "The seamstress needs to make final adjustments." Once he was gone, Thomas pulled Willa aside. "Are you truly all right, daughter? You seem different today." "I'm fine, Father," Willa assured him. "Just trying to adjust to my new reality." Thomas looked pained. "I wish there was another way, Willa. If I could take your place, I would." "I know, Father," Willa said, feeling guilty for the deception. She wanted to tell him about Yates's plan, but the fewer people who knew, the safer they all would be. That night, Willa found a note tucked under her pillow when she went to bed. "Tomorrow, noon. Meet me at the old Miller cabin. Come alone." Why, Willa's pulse quickened as she read it. The Miller cabin was an abandoned homestead about 3 miles from the ranch, isolated enough that they could talk freely there. She burned the note in her candle flame, watching as the paper curled and blackened, taking Yates's words with it. The next morning, Willa told her father she was going for a ride to clear her head. "I won't be long," she promised. "I just need some time alone before everything changes." Thomas nodded understandingly. "Be careful and don't be late for your fitting. Jenkins won't be pleased if you keep him waiting." "I won't," Willa said, knowing it was a promise she had no intention of keeping. She rode Penny at a gallop toward the Miller cabin, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The abandoned structure came into view just before noon, a small log cabin with a sagging roof and broken windows. Yates's horse was already tethered outside. Willa dismounted and approached cautiously. "Yates," she called. He appeared in the doorway, and the smile that lit his face at the sight of her made her breath catch. "You came," he said, as if he'd been afraid she wouldn't. "Of course I came," Willa replied. "You said you had a plan." Yates ushered her inside. Despite its dilapidated exterior, the cabin was surprisingly clean inside. A fire burned in the small hearth, and Yates had clearly made an effort to sweep away the dust and debris. "I've been in contact with the territorial marshal's office," Yates explained. "They're sending a deputy to assist with the arrest, but he won't arrive until tomorrow morning, the day of your wedding." "That doesn't give us much time," Willa observed nervously. "No, it doesn't," Yates agreed. "But I've found what we need, proof that Bartholomew Jenkins is indeed William Jenks." He withdrew several papers from his coat. "These are copies of land deeds from Colorado and Montana Territory, all transferred to different aliases that Jenkins has used. The signatures are identical, despite the different names." Willa examined the papers. "Will this be enough?" "Combined with my testimony and hopefully your father's, yes." Yates took her hands in his. "But there's a complication. Jenkins is supposed to meet you for a dress fitting this afternoon, correct?" Willa nodded. "At 2 o'clock. "When you don't show up, he'll come looking for you," Yates said grimly. "And when he can't find you, he'll suspect something's wrong." "What should I do?" Willa asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Yates squeezed her hands reassuringly. "You need to go back. Attend the fitting as if nothing's wrong. Tomorrow morning, make excuses to be alone. Say you're going to visit your mother's grave for her blessing or something similar. Meet me here at 9 o'clock. By then, the deputy will have arrived and we can proceed with the arrest." Willa didn't like the idea of facing Jenkins again, but she understood the necessity. "Very well, I'll do as you say." Yates studied her face. "You're very brave, Willa Crawford." "I'm terrified," she admitted with a shaky laugh. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Yates said softly. "It's acting despite being afraid." Their eyes locked, and this time there was no mistaking the current that passed between them. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yates leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, but when Willa responded, it deepened into something more urgent, more needful. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I shouldn't have done that," Yates said, though he didn't look remotely sorry. "No, you shouldn't have," Willa agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. "But I'm glad you did." Yates touched her cheek gently. "We should go. You need to get back before you're missed." As they rode back toward the ranch, they stayed on less traveled paths to avoid being seen together. When they reached the point where they needed to separate, Yates caught Willa's hand. "Be careful," he warned. "Jenkins is dangerous, especially if he suspects anything. Don't give him any reason to doubt you." "I won't," Willa promised. "Tomorrow at 9. "I'll be waiting," Yates said, reluctantly letting go of her hand. Willa returned to the ranch to find her father pacing anxiously on the porch. "There you are," he exclaimed. "Jenkins arrived early. He's been waiting for over an hour and is in quite a state." Willa's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry, Father, I lost track of time. The ride was so peaceful." "Well, hurry and change," Thomas urged. "He's in the parlor and he's not happy." Willa went upstairs, her hands trembling as she changed into a suitable dress for the fitting. When she entered the parlor, Jenkins was standing by the window, his back rigid with tension. "Bartholomew," she said, forcing warmth into her voice. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. I went for a ride and completely lost track of time." Jenkins turned slowly, his eyes cold despite his smile. "A ride, you say, alone?" "Of course alone," Willa said with a small laugh. "Who would I ride with?" Jenkins studied her face for a long moment. "Indeed. Well, we're late for your fitting." The seamstress is a busy woman. The dress fitting was an ordeal. The seamstress fussed and pinned while Jenkins watched with those calculating eyes. Several times he made comments about how the dress should fit tighter here or lower there, ignoring Willa's discomfort. When they returned to the ranch, Jenkins insisted on staying for dinner. Throughout the meal, he asked pointed questions about Willa's activities over the past few days, as if trying to catch her in a lie. She answered carefully, sticking as close to the truth as possible while omitting anything about Yates. After dinner, Jenkins asked to speak to Willa privately. Thomas reluctantly left them alone in the parlor. The moment they were alone, Jenkins's demeanor changed. He grabbed Willa's wrist hard enough to bruise. "Do you think I'm a fool?" he hissed. "What? No, of course not," Willa stammered, genuinely frightened by the fury in his eyes. "You were seen," Jenkins snarled. "One of my men saw you riding with that new hand of your father's. What was his name?" "Lawson." Willa's blood ran cold, but she managed to maintain a confused expression. "Mr. Lawson, I hardly know the man. Your friend must be mistaken." "My friends don't make mistakes," Jenkins said, his grip tightening. "Not if they value their lives." "You're hurting me," Willa protested, trying to pull away. Jenkins yanked her closer. "This is nothing compared to what will happen if you try to embarrass me. The wedding will proceed as planned tomorrow. You will smile, you will say your vows, and you will be an obedient wife. If you don't—" His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Your father won't live long enough to see sunset. Do you understand me?" Terrified, Willa nodded. "Yes, I understand." Jenkins released her wrist but remained uncomfortably close. "Good. Now be a good girl and kiss your future husband good night." Swallowing bile, Willa allowed him to press his lips against hers in a brief, possessive kiss. After he left, she collapsed onto the sofa, shaking uncontrollably. Jenkins knew something was wrong. He might not know exactly what Yates was planning, but he was suspicious enough to be dangerous. She needed to warn Yates, but how? She couldn't risk leaving the house again tonight. Jenkins might have men watching the ranch. Her only hope was to meet Yates as planned in the morning and pray that Jenkins didn't decide to act before then. That night, Willa barely slept. Every creak of the old house made her start, half expecting Jenkins to burst through her door. By dawn, she was exhausted but resolved. She dressed carefully in a simple riding outfit, then went downstairs to find her father already awake. "You're up early," Thomas observed, looking tired himself. "I couldn't sleep," Willa admitted. "Father, I'd like to visit Mother's grave before the wedding, too, say goodbye in a way. Would that be all right?" Thomas's eyes softened. "Of course, Willa. Your mother would be proud of you, you know, for doing what needs to be done to save the family." The guilt was almost overwhelming. "Thank you, Father. I won't be long." As Willa rode away from the ranch, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She took a circuitous route to the Miller cabin, doubling back several times to ensure she wasn't being followed. Finally, she arrived at the agreed meeting place. Yates was waiting outside, tension evident in his stance. When he saw her, relief washed over his face. "Thank God," he said, striding toward her. "I was worried when you were late." "I had to be careful," Willa explained, dismounting quickly. "Jenkins knows something's wrong. He confronted me last night, said one of his men saw us riding together." Yates's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" Willa hesitated, then pulled up her sleeve to reveal the bruises on her wrist. Yates swore under his breath, gently taking her arm to examine the marks. "That tears it," he said grimly. "We're not waiting for the deputy. We're getting you out of here now." "What about the arrest, the evidence?" Willa asked. "It'll have to wait," Yates said, already moving to saddle his horse. "Your safety comes first." "He threatened my father," Willa said, fear evident in her voice. "Said if I didn't go through with the wedding, he'd kill him before sunset." Yates paused. "Then we need to get your father, too. We'll ride to the ranch, explain everything, and get him to come with us." "Will that work?" "It has to," Yates said firmly. "I won't let Jenkins hurt either of you." They were just about to mount up when the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Yates pushed Willa behind him, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. "Get inside," he ordered. "Now." Willa hesitated. "I won't leave you out here alone." "Willa, please," Yates said urgently. "I can't protect you if I'm worried about you getting caught in crossfire." Reluctantly, Willa retreated to the cabin doorway, though she didn't go fully inside. From her position, she could see Yates standing tall and unafraid as 3 riders came into view. Her heart sank when she recognized Jenkins in the lead, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. "Well, well," Jenkins called as they approached. "What do we have here?" "A U.S. Marshal and my runaway bride. How convenient." Yates didn't lower his weapon. "It's over, Jenkins. Or should I say Jenks, William Jenks, wanted for murder in Colorado Territory." Jenkins didn't seem surprised that Yates knew his true identity. "Marshal Yates Lawson. I thought you looked familiar when Crawford hired you. You've been chasing me for what, 2 years now? Long enough to know all your tricks," Yates replied evenly. "It ends today." Jenkins laughed, a chilling sound. "I don't think so." He turned slightly to address Willa. "Come out here, my dear. It's time to go home and prepare for our wedding." "She's not going anywhere with you," Yates said, his voice hard. "Oh, I think she will," Jenkins replied confidently. "You see, while we've been having this little chat, 2 of my other men have been paying a visit to her father. 1 word from me and Thomas Crawford is a dead man." Willa gasped. "You're lying." Jenkins smiled coldly. "Are you willing to take that chance? Come with me now and your father lives. Resist and he dies. It's a simple choice, really." Yates never took his eyes off Jenkins. "Don't listen to him, Willa. He's bluffing." "Am I?" Jenkins reached into his coat and withdrew a pocket watch, Thomas Crawford's prized possession, a gift from Willa's mother on their wedding day. "Your father was most reluctant to part with this, My men had to be persuasive. Willa felt sick. What have you done to him? Nothing permanent. Yet. Jenkins tucked the watch away. His continued good health depends entirely on you, my dear. Willa stepped forward, her decision made. If I go with you, you'll leave my father alone. And Marshal Lawson too. Willa, no, Yates protested. Jenkins ignored him. You have my word. Come now, and no one else needs to get hurt today. Don't trust him, Yates urged. The moment you're in his control, we're both dead anyway. Willa knew Yates was probably right, but she couldn't risk her father's life. I have to, Yates. I'm sorry. As she moved toward Jenkins, one of his men dismounted and grabbed her roughly by the arm. Yates started forward, but the other man trained his gun on him. I wouldn't, Marshal, Jenkins warned. Even you can't outdraw two men. The tension was broken by the sound of more approaching horses. Everyone turned to see a group of riders cresting the hill, at least 6 men, led by a figure Willa recognized with a surge of hope. Sheriff Wilson from Spokane, accompanied by several deputies and, to her immense relief, her father. Drop your weapons, Sheriff Wilson called. You're surrounded. Jenkins's men hesitated, looking to their boss for direction. Jenkins himself seemed momentarily stunned by this turn of events. Taking advantage of the distraction, Yates lunged forward, tackling the man holding Willa. She stumbled free as the 2 men hit the ground hard, wrestling for control of the gun. Chaos erupted. Jenkins drew his weapon, but before he could fire, Thomas Crawford charged forward on horseback, knocking him to the ground. Sheriff Wilson and his men surrounded Jenkins's remaining henchmen, who wisely surrendered. Willa rushed to help Yates, who had gained the upper hand in his struggle but had taken a nasty cut to his cheek. Are you all right? She asked anxiously. I'm fine, he assured her, binding the wrists of his now subdued opponent. Your father appears to be in one piece, Willa said, relief washing over her as she saw Thomas dismounting nearby. Jenkins was being restrained by 2 deputies, cursing violently as Sheriff Wilson read out the charges against him. Thomas hurried to his daughter, enfolding her in a tight embrace. Thank God you're safe, he murmured. When Lawson's friend arrived at the ranch this morning and explained everything, I nearly collapsed with shock. Friend? Willa asked, confused. Yates approached, wiping blood from his cheek. Deputy Marshal Cole. He arrived early and found me gone. When he heard about the situation from one of the ranch hands, he went straight to the ranch to warn your father. Just in time, too, Thomas added grimly. Jenkins's men were already there, though they hadn't made their move yet. We managed to capture them and force them to reveal where Jenkins had gone. Willa turned to Yates. You saved us, both of us. We all saved each other, Yates corrected, his eyes never leaving hers. Sheriff Wilson approached, looking pleased with himself. William Jenks, also known as Bartholomew Jenkins, is officially in custody. Marshal Lawson will need your statement for the territorial court. Of course, Yates agreed. I have documentation in my saddlebag that proves his identity and links him to crimes in Colorado and Montana. As the law officers dealt with Jenkins and his men, Willa, Yates, and Thomas had a moment alone. Thomas looked between his daughter and the marshal, a knowing expression crossing his face. I think, he said carefully, that I owe both of you an apology. Willa, for trying to force you into a marriage with that monster, and you, Marshal, for doubting your intentions when you first arrived. You were trying to protect your daughter and your home, Yates said. I understand that. Thomas smiled sadly. Perhaps, but I went about it all wrong. He turned to Willa. Can you forgive an old fool, daughter? Willa embraced her father. There's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was best. And now, Thomas asked, looking meaningfully at Yates. What happens now? Yates cleared his throat. That depends on your daughter, sir. His eyes met Willa's, filled with hope and uncertainty. "I think," Willa said slowly, "that I've had quite enough excitement for one day. Perhaps we should all return to the ranch and discuss the future once we've had time to recover." Thomas nodded approvingly. "A sensible suggestion. Marshal Lawson, I hope you'll join us for dinner this evening." "I'd be honored, sir," Yates replied, his gaze still on Willa. As they rode back to the ranch, Willa found herself next to Yates. "You never told me how you became a marshal," she said conversationally. Yates smiled. "It's not a very exciting story. My father was a sheriff in Texas. I followed in his footsteps after he passed." "And now, what happens after Jenkins is prosecuted?" Willa asked, trying to sound casual though her heart was pounding. "Well," Yates said carefully, "I've been considering a change. The marshal's office in Spokane is looking for experienced lawmen to settle in the territory. It's growing fast, needs good people to help keep the peace." "Spokane is lovely this time of year," Willa remarked, a smile playing at her lips. "Though I hear the winters can be harsh." "Nothing a good fire and warm company couldn't make bearable," Yates replied, his eyes twinkling. Willa laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Marshal Lawson, are you flirting with me?" "Absolutely, Miss Crawford." His expression grew more serious. "I know we haven't known each other long, but sometimes," Willa interrupted gently, "time isn't what matters. It's finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and values what they see." "Is that what I've done?" Yates asked softly. "Seen you?" "Yes," Willa said simply, "and I've seen you too." The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. As they approached the ranch, her home, now truly hers again, Willa felt a sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring challenges, a trial, recovery from the trauma of recent events, decisions about what came next. But for now, riding beside this man who had risked everything to save her, Willa Crawford felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. In the months that followed, Willa watched as Jenkins, or Jenks, as he was officially known in court, was tried and convicted for his crimes. With Yates's evidence and the testimony of several of his former victims who were tracked down, Jenkins was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. The Crawford Ranch flourished under Thomas's renewed management. Free from debt, and with the help of loyal hands, the cattle operation expanded, and prosperity returned to the family. Yates accepted the position with the marshal's office in Spokane, though his duties often took him throughout the territory. He was a frequent visitor to the Crawford Ranch, and no one was surprised when, 6 months after the fateful day at the Miller cabin, he asked Thomas for permission to court Willa properly. "About time," was Thomas's only comment, though the twinkle in his eye betrayed his happiness. Their courtship was proper but filled with a deep understanding that went beyond words. They took long rides together, shared quiet evenings on the porch, and gradually learned each other's stories, the joys and sorrows that had shaped them both. One crisp autumn evening, as they watched the sunset from the ridge where they had first met, Yates turned to Willa with an expression of such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "I've been carrying this for weeks," he said, withdrawing a small box from his pocket. "Waiting for the perfect moment. But I'm beginning to think there's no such thing as a perfect moment, just perfect company." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring with a small diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "Willa Crawford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because anyone is forcing you or because of duty or debt, but simply because you want to." Tears filled Willa's eyes as she looked from the ring to Yates's hopeful face. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure, "because I want to, because I love you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Yates pulled her close. "I've loved you since that first day," he confessed, "when you stood up to Jenkins in your parlor, frightened but refusing to show it. I think I've loved you since you pretended there was a sick mare, Willa replied with a smile. My very own knight in dusty cowboy clothes. Their wedding took place the following spring, a joyful affair that bore no resemblance to the somber ceremony Jenkins had planned. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of their local heroine and the marshal who had saved her. Thomas Crawford beamed as he walked his daughter down the aisle. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered. Willa squeezed his arm. She is watching, father, I can feel it. As Yates and Willa exchanged their vows, the promise they made to each other was far more than the formal words spoken before the congregation. It was a promise forged in danger and sealed with choice to respect, to protect, to cherish not just in the easy times but in the difficult ones as well. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. Yates continued his work with the Marshal's service, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity throughout the territory. Willa divided her time between helping her father with the ranch business and assisting the Marshal's office with administrative duties. Together, they became a formidable team, respected throughout the region. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Willa's father, arrived 2 years after their marriage. He was followed by twin girls, Emily and Elizabeth, who had their mother's honey blonde hair and their father's blue eyes and stubborn determination. The Crawford Ranch, once nearly lost to Jenkins's schemes, thrived under the combined stewardship of Thomas, Willa, and Yates. They expanded into horse breeding, with Yates's expertise with Mustangs proving invaluable. The ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine horses. Many descended from the spirited Mustang that had brought Willa and Yates together that fateful night in the corral. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Willa leaned her head against Yates's shoulder. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? She asked. If you hadn't been tracking Jenkins, if you hadn't stopped at our ranch that day, Yates considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I look at you, at our children, at the life we've built, and I can't imagine any other path. Nor can I, Willa agreed, taking his hand. Though I'm still grateful every day that a certain cowboy rode in and changed my fate. Yates smiled and kissed her softly. I'm the grateful one, Willa. You saved me as much as I saved you. As the sun set over the land that had nearly been lost, casting long shadows across the thriving ranch, Willa Crawford Lawson knew with absolute certainty that some fates were meant to be changed, and some loves were worth fighting for even against the most dangerous of odds. The life she had now wasn't the one she had been promised, but the one she had chosen. And in that choice lay all the difference between mere existence and true living, between resignation and joy, between a life dictated by others and one claimed as her own. In the end, that was the greatest gift Yates had given her, not just freedom from Jenkins, but the courage to shape her own destiny. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought a determined Marshal to her door on that spring morning so many years ago, when hope had seemed as distant as the moon and love an impossible dream. Now, with her family around her and the man she loved by her side, Willa knew that some dreams did come true not by chance or magic, but through courage, determination, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest times, dawn would eventually break. And in that light, all things were possible.